The Rancho Cucamonga Jane Doe. On June 7, 1979, a nude body of an unidentified female was found face down on the edge of a grape vineyard near the intersection of A Street and Rochester Street in Rancho Cucamonga, California, which is in San Bernardino County. The autopsy determined she had died about 24 hours before and was strangled to death, as well as suffering stab wounds and blunt force trauma. She was believed to be somewhere between 15 and 30 years old, about 5'2" and 100 pounds. She had shoulder-length light brown hair, brown eyes, and was found wearing lower quarter earth shoes. She had good dental health and a slight overlap in her bite. There are post-mortem photos available online if you would like to look. I do not show those on this channel. She would have been born between 1949 and 1964. She has gone unidentified for 49 years. If you have any information at all, please call the number on your screen. The Macon County John Doe, 1977. Macon County John Doe was a young man who was found sitting under a tree. He was about 103 feet from Highway 185 on Wire Road in Tuskegee, Alabama. There's no signs that he was in distress. He was estimated to only be between 20 and 25 years old, though. Maybe 6 feet tall, 135 to 155 pounds. His hair was dark brown. Authorities came to the conclusion that he was waiting for someone to pick him up, that he perhaps suffered a heart attack or a fatal snake bite. It does seem like a convenient element of the case to simply dismiss it as an accident. While it's not impossible, someone that age having a heart attack is extremely unlikely. Also, if he was waiting for someone, why did that person not report him as having passed away when they went to pick him up? That said, his remains were skeletal by the time they were found, so there's no concrete way to know what his cause of death was. He had dark hair that was 3 to 4 inches in length. He had a partial upper denture for his upper right lateral incisor. His clothing was faded glory. His shoes were around a size 9, and they had visible paint splatters. It's believed he had been sitting at that location for about 16 months. If you have any information at all on this case, please call the number on your screen. He would have been born between 1952 and 1957. He's gone unidentified for 44 years. The Brunswick County John Doe, 1977. The Brunswick County John Doe was a male found in the Brunswick River in 1977. His remains were tied inside of a burlap sack. It's impossible to tell where he went in the river, but it's believed he may have drifted from areas such as Elizabethtown or Fayetteville. He may have originally been dumped into the Cape Fear River. Very little is known about who he was, but we know he had black hair and a mild form of scoliosis. He had extensive dental work done from multiple dentists. All but 7 teeth had significant work done, including a stainless steel crown. He had no dental problems or signs of decay at the time of his death. A wildlife officer found the burlap sack with his body after he'd been wrapped and snagged in the banks of the Brunswick River in Brunswick County, North Carolina. From the looks of it, his body most likely hadn't traveled too far. Along with being wrapped in burlap, there was also a burlap strap. It was tied in a simple loop around his right wrist and another in a double loop around his neck. It was determined that he had died weeks prior. Unfortunately, due to decompensation, the cause of death was hard to determine. They eventually ruled it was a homicide by drowning. This conclusion was drawn because his hands were sticking outside of the burlap sack when it was found. It appears he had unsuccessfully tried to escape before he drowned. Our John Doe was an African American believed to have been between 18 and 30 years of age. He stood at 5'9" and weighed approximately 112 pounds. His hair was black, and they believe his eyes were likely brown. Unfortunately, investigators looking into the case do not have access to John Doe's DNA. Upon the initial autopsy being completed, his remains were unfortunately cremated, and he received a burial at sea. His fingerprints and dental information, however, are available for comparison. If you have any information at all in this case, please call the number on your screen. Jennifer Fairgate, also known as the Fargate Doe. I usually only cover U.S. cases, but this one is bizarre and the woman may actually have been from the U.S. I think it's unlikely, but she spoke German and English without an accent, and she booked her room in English. In June of 1995, she checked into a luxury hotel in Oslo, Norway. She used a fake ID, and it brings everything about her into question. Just one of many strange things, though. She spoke English when she booked the room, but when she arrived, she only spoke German. She was around 5'2". She weighed 147 pounds. While she checked into the hotel, she would never check out again. She died of a gunshot wound, and the whole situation is sketchy, although it was ruled a suicide right away. In fact, it would take 25 years before the police would begin to question whether or not it was self-inflicted. The woman checked in around 11 p.m. on May 31, 1995. She booked the room for 3 nights, giving her name as Jennifer Fairgate, born August 23, 1973, and stating she was from Belgium. Her ID would turn out to be completely bogus. She would also check somebody named Lois Fargate into the room with her, but no other woman was seen. However, a different guest said that they saw her with a man aged 25 to 40, but he's never been identified. She disappeared for 2 days, but paid for the room for 3. Her room keycard wasn't used at all on those 2 days. No one saw her leave or come in except for once. The cleaning staff didn't find any evidence that she had been there, but they noted a pair of vivid high-heel shoes that were a designer brand and worth quite a bit of money. They were in her room, and it was notable enough to notice. The strange thing was, once she passed away, those shoes were gone. Housekeeping would later notice that these were the only things that were missing. Everything else was still in the room. While in her room, she only made 2 phone calls. They were both to Belgium, and neither were valid phone numbers. On that final day, she put up a Do Not Disturb sign. This sign was still there when it was time to check out, and that was when staff decided to check on her. Security eventually knocked on her door, and just as they did so, a gunshot rang out. Alarmed, they immediately called the police. They were understandably concerned for their own safety, and so they left the area. Therefore, nobody saw who entered or exited the room. In the meantime, a businessman from across the hall was supposed to be in Belgium and had checked out 2 days after our doe. He made a very suspicious statement to the staff there. He made a comment about being sorry that she had passed away, except for at that time nobody had found her body yet. He's only referred to in documents as Mr. F. The police tried to locate him, but he disappeared and he's never been found. The room itself was unsecured from the time of the shot until the police arrived. The Oslo police wouldn't arrive for nearly an hour after the shot rang out, in fact. When they entered the room, she was lying on a bed, covered in blood, with a gunshot wound to her head. Police noticed it was a Browning 9mm pistol. The gun itself was considered to be of consequence. Norwegian criminals tended to use Browning 9mm pistols for some reason. In addition, the ID number on the gun had been dissolved with acid. Therefore, the gun couldn't be traced back to anyone. This wasn't the only strange thing, however. She was found holding the gun upside down when fired. There was also 0 gunshot residue present on her hand. The door had been locked from the inside, but it was set up in a way it could be locked as someone left. It would also be determined that shot that was heard was a test shot into a pillow. She was actually killed with the second shot that nobody reported hearing. It was considered strange that nobody investigated anything about this case. They just decided it was in fact a suicide. I'm not sure if it's possible to shoot yourself without any gunshot residue, but that's actually a good question if anybody knows anything about this. If you have any knowledge of gunshot residue, I would love it if you would leave it in the comments below. It was also reported that the second key to the room was located inside. It was believed to belong to the second occupant named Lois, who was never seen. The man she was seen with across the hall has never been identified, and if he was the same man who said that he heard she had died, that man was also Belgian, but there's no indication they are the same person. When our Jane Doe checked in, she claimed she was 21. Her autopsy, however, said that she was around 25 to 35. All of the labels from her clothes had been removed, so it's impossible to tell what country any of them came from. She had short black hair, but it appeared it might have been dyed. She had gold and porcelain dental work. The police did decide to check where she lived, but the street she gave in Belgium doesn't even exist. She gave an employer, but he doesn't exist either. A plastic newspaper bag was in her room, having an edition of the USA Today newspaper. However, it was addressed to room 2816, which was located on the opposite end of the hallway. If they knew who was staying in that room at that time, they didn't say. When they examined her briefcase, it contained 25 bullets and the gun used in her death. Also, housekeepers had noticed her room had a single duvet on the bed. Yet, at the time of her death, there were 2 duvets on the bed. The investigators didn't bother to search for any hairs or fluids, and the bedding was entirely disposed of the next day. She had dinner delivered to her room the night before, and she was found to have eaten shortly before she died, but that means she would have refrained from eating until the next morning. I have no idea why the police suddenly decided to look at it much later, but when they went back, they discovered the records were destroyed in 2010. The authorities believe she could be European and was around 24 years old at the time of death, meaning she was born around 1971. She has gone unidentified for 26 years. That's it for today. I'd love to hear what you think about these cases if you take a moment to comment below. If you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other.